variety in how you can run it. You know, Terra Water isn't something that you normally see when it comes to Incineroar, because recently it's just been purely Ghost Terra.
Yes, and Ghost Terrestrialization has enabled it to avoid those close combats, but let's not avoid anything anymore and jump into the Swiss round 4 match at EUIC. Ashton Cox with the Raging Bolt and the Amoonguss on the field against the Amoonguss and Urshifu of Marco Silva.
Indeed, we've got a mushroom face-off here from both of these trainers. With a Raging Bolt in the mix, you know, it feels like it's in a good enough position right now. However, you've got to take into consideration the Spore threat, which is great at this point. But U-turn focus here, of course, no redirection of any sorts, given you've got the both grass-type Pokemon on the field. However, we're in a spot where the other slot is susceptible to being spored, but not for Marco being able to bring that Incineroar with the safety goggles now.
Exactly, that Spore pressure was very dominant, so nice to be able to just quickly U-turn off the field and then bring in this safety goggles Pokemon. The Draco Meteor is going to connect though. Incineroar doesn't get in freely, does over 50% damage. We don't have to worry about the second one getting the KO thanks to the special attack drop. Even the double up is not enough, but the poison, poor Incineroar having a rough time out here on the field.
Yeah, just a tiny bit, as we actually see both of the Amoonguss opt to go on the offensive. They don't want to be playing around with any sort of Spore focus there. And we got another poison on the field. These Amoonguss actually going through and, you know, paying off quite nicely with that secondary effect there.
Don't write them off as just support Pokemon. They can get that damage on the board as well, and this is something that both traders have to contend with. At least it's a little bit even Stevens. They've got it on both Pokemon respectively, and that Incineroar is in a very precarious situation. It doesn't have an access to a berry like we see Incineroar use a lot to be able to regain that HP. Once it's gone, it is gone. Now, Marco can go for the fake out here, but you have to watch out for that poison chip. Is it worth losing your Incineroar here, or do you want to preserve Intimidate for later in the match?
Ooh, as we have Electro Web not being quite enough to pick up the KO on the Incineroar, as it will be able to survive and get a move of its choice set off here. However, we actually see the Amoonguss move first from Ashton's side. Flare Bits following up right now, not quite enough to pick up the KO, but dealing substantial amount of damage at the cost of its own usability. Will be knocked out right now, but Amoonguss on Marco's side is oh so free to try to focus down with a Spore if he really wants to try to slow down this Raging Bolt.
Incineroar really trying to put Amoonguss back in its box here with that Flare Blitz, but gets KO'd to its own effect. The Raging Bolt, again, now in the same position Incineroar was previously, very precarious on the HP bar. These Amoongusses relatively unchecked. Yes, the Amoonguss on Ashton's side took that Flare Blitz, but it actually enabled a knockout, and it had its Citrus Berry in its back pocket, able to get a little bit of HP recovery. And if you really want to get that HP rolling back up, you can switch it out and use that Regenerator ability.
Yeah, and the Raging Bolt didn't actually switch out there. I was expecting it to because of the -2 special attack drop, but wanting to try to stay in and at least sort of clear the field out for Ashton's Pokemon likely still on the bench. So that's sort of the role of this Assault Vest Raging Bolt. They tend to try to stay on the field as much as they can, get speed control focused down, because they're just so bulky. It's really tough to try to corner it down and pick up a KO onto it.
I completely agree. It's a difficult situation. I love the way the Amoonguss on both sides are actually the ones going on the offensive. Landorus, however, on Marco Silva's side might be able to help it out a little bit, give it a bit more oomph, because Landorus has such great coverage. Going for something like the opposing Earth Power will do a lot of damage into that opposing Amoonguss, or even into that Raging Bolt to guarantee the KO. I like this play by Ashton. You want to use that Regenerator ability to get the HP right back up on your Amoonguss, as well as bringing the Ogerpon onto the field. This, again, is a Pokemon that can deal so swiftly with the opposing Amoonguss.
Oh, as it actually opts to go for the redirection here, not wanting any sort of focus onto the Landorus. It wants to try to be as squeaky clean as possible, as the Earth Power nearly picks up the KO onto the Ogerpon, but most importantly, the Snarl connects onto the Landorus, being able to bring it down to -1 of its special attack now.
Honestly, that was so much damage into the opposing Pokemon. Yes, you're able to get that Citrus Berry back onto the Amoonguss, but the Landorus in a prime position here. I think the key thing for me is the fact that you've also got the Ogerpon not going to be affected by the Rage Powder as well. It can just straight target down that opposing Landorus. So I think now the speed is going to be incredibly important. Ogerpon took so much damage in that turn, and it really does now look a little bit more difficult for Ashton. You can see the Chi and Pow in the back. Yes, that's a Pokemon that can deal really well with the Amoonguss and with the Landorus, but with that Urshifu, not so much.
It's kind of tough because Ogerpon was sort of getting into position to be able to be a hard sweeper and at least try to make sure that it covers the Amoonguss and can pick up that direct KO. It depends on the training of the Ogerpon. They tend to be a bit faster than Landorus, but only if you try to invest fully towards speed. However, in this spot, the fact that you're so low on resources means that Ashton has to feel forced to try to make certain plays that may be anticipated by Marco.
I love the Chi and Pao coming into the field, though. It's going to bring that Sword of Ruin ability and boost up all the physical damage on the field, which is only on Ashton's side. The Amoonguss can go for that Rage Powder all day long, but of course, we know that the Ogerpon will not be affected by it, and it was going for the Ivy Cudgel anyway. Goodbye, Amoonguss. You're out of here.
Yeah, completely out for the count in game one. Through, of course, that very nice combination there, as the Landorus opts to go for the substitute. So it has been able to get it off freely right now. We do know that the Urshifu is choice scarfed on Marco's side. So this is going to be a big threat that Ashton is going to have to really try to find a way to position himself out to getting rid of.
This was a great turn for Marcus because, for Marco, because you're able to go for this substitute. Landorus is now breathing a little easier in the face of the Chi and Pao that's just joined the field. The Urshifu with that Choice Scarf can apply some good damage. Something like the Close Combat is easily going to take that Chi and Pao right down to its Focus Sash, but at the same time, a Surging Strikes is going to be a good option to lock into. You only need one to completely bop that Ogerpon away, but also for the Chi and Pao, it can put you in a position to try and get that KO.
It can, and you do have the redirection option on this Ogerpon, so Marco can easily try to opt to go for a U-turn here, dispatch of the Ogerpon whilst being aware of the threat of the Amoonguss in order to better position himself with that final fourth Pokemon he has in the back. But, of course, we do have the Terrestrialization, and it is going to be the Urshifu into the Water type, so maybe going for the full offensive play here.
Yes, really banking on this Urshifu to be able to get the deal done with these Surging Strikes. But it's going to be a Terrestrialization apiece. This is the moment that our trainers want to shine on the stage as Ashton goes for the Chi and Pao. So this is actually going to be bringing the Terra Stella, going to be boosting up all of its different move pool attacks.
Yeah, and this is great on such a Pokemon that, of course, has 3 attacks, which may not be, obviously, completely covered by its dual typing. But we do have redirection on the field. Surging Strikes, of course, will be able to pick up the KO here. So Marco opting to try to break that Focus Sash down on the Chi and Pao. Ashton, in return, wanting to deal as much damage onto this Urshifu. If he has completely ignored the Landorus, but no, actually seems like the focus is going to be on the Landorus, so the Terra Stella there is actually wasted in terms of the Ice-type move focus into the Landorus, which you'd say there's times 4 weak, so it doesn't really matter, but it depends on what other options Marco may have available.
You're right, it's an interesting choice to go for the Terra Stella there because you don't get any defensive capabilities from it. And you've now, like you said, burnt through that ice move option that you have. And really to no avail. Yes, of course, you're able to break the substitute, but you could have done that with your eyes closed. You're a Chi and Pao and it's a Landorus. So it kind of is a little bit null and void, although very spectacular. But I think really for Chi and Pao, the boost is going to come through on the Sacred Sword and the Sucker Punch potentially. You want to be able to get that extra damage on the Dark-type Sucker Punch in order to maybe cultivate a KO, because you're looking at Choice Scarf Urshifu here as well. You know it's locked into Surging Strikes. That's going to be able to get the Chi and Pao in one shot. This is the key, though, Amoonguss. You can bring that onto the field, go for the redirection. It's not running Rocky Helmet like we've seen previously, and it has already used its Citrus Berry, but it's still going to be able to take 3 attacks.
Yeah, and the important thing is getting that redirection from the Urshifu. It is going to be moving first due to its choice stuff, so you just want to be able to at least pick up the KO onto the Landorus, but it's going to be a bit of a mind game between whether Marco's Lando goes for the Protect or not, and you need to try to identify what the correct play is here, but no Protects Lou.
Yes, just the Rage Powder from the Amoonguss doing what it does best and drawing in all of those attacks to protect its partner. Of course, Urshifu with the Choice Scarf locked into the Surging Strikes will go first, and as you can see, even though it will be 3 guaranteed critical hits, Amoonguss can take those all day long.
Yeah, as naturally, the fact that we've got Ice Spinner on this Chi and Pao and not an Ice School Crash, if the focus is going to be targeting that Landorus, it will be picking up the KO, and it does indeed. So Lando is out for the count in game 1. Urshifu left on its lonesome self. If Ashton really wants to, can try to get a Regenerator proc again, but it just needs to really take into consideration having ample amount of HP remaining on this Amoonguss.
I don't think Ashton needs to, though. You can go for the Rage Powder and kind of sacrifice this Amoonguss. Yes, go for some damage using the Chi and Pao, and at the end of the day, you have your Raging Bolt in the back. You can go for that priority Thunderclap and just get the knockout. Yes, you can see the Surging Strikes come through. I think maybe the third one will even get the knockout here, but Amoonguss has put in the work, and the actual beauty of it being KO'd is now that Raging Bolt can just come in and clean up game 1.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the power of Raging Bolt, right? You know, the fact that this Urshifu is completely locked due to its choice stuff just means it's a checkmate scenario no matter what the Chien Pao does. So, of course, there is the poison to take into consideration, but regardless, at this situation right now, Raging Bolt, at least it does have enough fuel in its tank to be able to dispatch, especially with that 2-hit KO that was provided by the Chien Pao.
And this is why priority moves are so important. The Sucker Punch is enough to get the KO. Doesn't even need the Raging Bolt. It's just there for style points more than anything. Pure intimidation against a water type in order to secure game 1 for Ashton. And I mean, what an amazing way he played out that endgame.
Yeah, it was just very nice play. A stellar performance, some would say. So
I see what you did there.
Oh, did you? But I think the positioning there is key. We felt like initially, due to the fact that Raging Bolt took so much damage, also had a poison infliction onto it as well, you surely started feeling like, oh, okay, this sort of leaves less room for Ashton to be able to better position himself. We saw the Ogerpon, it took so much damage from that Earth Power on the Landorus, but it was able to at least guarantee the spot where you're able to whittle down Marco's Pokemon to the point where Chien Pao gets brought in and it just goes for the damage. And the Ivy Cudgel here is such a really nice touch because at least you guarantee pick up the KO on Amoonguss or deal so much damage onto any switch-ins.
And I really like the way that Ashton preserved that Amoonguss for later. You can see here the Chien Pao being able to get these solid KOs, but it was only really enabled because of the support that Amoonguss was able to give it, guaranteeing that it wasn't going to be outsped by something like the opposing Urshifu and just clean KOing that opposing Landorus.
Yeah, and I think just being able to completely understand that and try to build a strategy on subsequent turns going into it, it's sort of key right now. You know, these are both LAIC champions, and you already know that they've proven their worth, that they're able to easily be one of the great candidates to be able to pick up another title to put into their trophy case for this. So you already know that you're at that level. So at least that sort of gives you a bit, if you're a great trainer, it gives you that visibility that you know your opponent will 100% identify either the correct or the more probable plays, and you can make your own bets on that. And that's where we have so many mind games that are played out on that level.
That's very true. And the other thing I like about the team compositions here is the fact they're both running Flutter Mane, but they're nowhere to be found. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see them not come into this match either. And it's where we have seen this shift in the meta. You know, Pokemon like Urshifu being given that choice scarf are just able to really get the KO, particularly with Terrestrialization Water, with Surging Strikes onto the opposing Flutter Mane. Again, Pokemon like the Amoonguss just able to put it to sleep, doesn't have to really worry about the fairy type attacks. And also, you know, Raging Bolt being given a lot of bulk and turning into a fairy in its own right with Terrestrialization just becomes such a special defensive wall to the opposing Flutter Mane. So it becomes very difficult for trainers to navigate with it on the field.
It does, as we've got our game 2 leads going into this. Marco bringing the Incineroar and that Landorus Incarnate versus the Raging Bolt and the Ogerpon. But more importantly, we've got that -1 attack over on Ogerpon immediately.
Yes, Ogerpon in a difficult spot, particularly as Incineroar on Marco's side has the utility to go for this fake out. That means that the Raging Bolt, particularly with the Assault Vest that can't protect anyway, is maybe going to be stopped from going for something like the Electro Web to lower the speed, or even we saw the devastating Draco Meteor in turn 1 of game 1. That could potentially be stopped. The Ogerpon isn't running the Swords Dance, so like we've seen in previous matches on this broadcast, it hasn't got the capability to boost its attack back up. It's going to have to switch out and come back in order to be able to benefit.
As the Spiky Shield comes out right now from Ogerpon, wanting to try to go on the defensive, maybe get a bit of damage dealt onto Incineroar via fake out, but wow, nearly picking up the 1-hit KO, the Landorus Earth Power into that Raging Bolt that did not terrestrialize away from a Draco Meteor, doing equal amounts of great damage onto Incineroar, automatically putting it in a spot where Marco's going to have to be really cautious on switch-ins or switch-outs to be able to sponge up damage.
Landorus is insane. Being able to get that big damage across onto the opposing Raging Bolt just really puts Ashton in a difficult position. It also takes the parting shot for its troubles. Now, Marco, I think, comes out in such a commanding spot. You can bring your Amoonguss in. Yes, you have to worry about the potential Ivy Cudgel on the opposing side, but then again, it is at -1. And now Amoonguss can go for that redirection, support Landorus, and maybe getting a substitute up, or again, even a KO with something like another Earth Power.
Yeah, you've got a cascade of different plays that could be played here. Marco could try to go for the easy switching of the Incineroar and get another Intimidate drop onto the Ogerpon, or Ashton could try to read into that, go for the Terrestrialization, bring in that Chien Pao, focus in for the KO onto the Amoonguss, anticipating Marco not making that switch, which may actually pick up the KO onto the Amoonguss.
It would be kind of funny here if the Amoonguss had gone for the Sludge Bomb into that Raging Bolt to try and get the knockout, and now might have the potential to break a Focus Sash on the Chien-Pao. We have yet to see. But this is one way to be able to stop that Intimidate from wreaking havoc in your plans. Go for your Embody Aspect ability, boost up your attack, so it's now back at neutral. Yeah,
back at neutral, but you do have to be cautious on whether Marco's opted to go for the Protect on the Amoonguss as well or not, but no Protect. Ivy Cudgel focuses onto the Landorus. Is it enough to pick up the KO? Oh, just barely misses out, allowing this Landorus to do the exact same onto the Ogerpon, knocking it out. One-hit KO, and all of a sudden we've got Ogerpon, such a great utility Pokemon with redirection, just completely knocked out.
The Master schools the student there, not able to get the one-hit KO on Landorus, but it shows it how it was done, gets that knockout, and also the Amoonguss critically was going for that Sludge Bomb, breaks the Focus Sash on that Chien-Pao. Marco coming back with a vengeance in this set in Game 2.
Oh, it's doing it in such a great fashion as well. Even though Chien-Pao, it does have its Focus Sash broken, at least we've got Amoonguss that can try to vie for any sort of, like damage control in certain ways, but when you actually look at the board state, Amoonguss could easily switch out now if it so wants to avoid Ice Spinners into the Incineroar. And then Marco's got that rotation available to himself in order to slow down Ashton's sort of comeback efforts even further.
And I think this is a wise adjustment here. You can bring the Incineroar in. It's a Pokemon that isn't going to worry about taking any Ice-type moves from the Chien-Pao, and at the same time, the Safety Goggles stop it from worrying about a Spore potentially from that Amoonguss. So a really nice adjustment, as well as applying Fake-Out pressure in the next turn. Chien-Pao also protects here, so it is going to have to run the risk of a Double Protect in the next turn if it wants to avoid that Fake-Out. As you can just see, once again, the Sludge Bombs coming out here from one Amoonguss into the other.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the Master Ball variation of Amoonguss seems like it's trying to do the best it can versus the Pokeball. Obviously, the shiny form's being called out there.
It's a rivalry, right?
It's a bit of a rivalry, right? But something that I did want to make note as well, Lou, is Amoonguss over on Ashton's side does not have Protect. It has Pollen Puff, and that's the difference between Marco's, which does have Protect over Pollen Puff, so that could be a key player.
Oh, definitely. It doesn't have that defensive capability. It's definitely more of a supportive role. I like the Raging Bolt coming in here, kind of, being the willing sacrifice to be able to take that Fake Out and enable the Chien-Pao to have a little bit more flexibility in the endgame, because you need that Chien-Pao for the Landorus. Amoonguss does, of course, go to Spore, but it's not going to affect another Amoonguss. That's just not how the game works.
No, it is not. But there is some sort of scenario that I could see here. If Ashton wants to capitalize off of a potential defensive play from Marco here, going for the side Pollen Puff, maybe trying to bring back that Focus Sash, and as it wouldn't be naturally broken, right?
Yeah, exactly. It hasn't kind of been utilized fully. If you can restore it back to full HP before it, gets dropped down to the 1 HP, then you're still able to capitalize on that item usage. So a really good observation there. Amoonguss definitely in prime position to help Chien-Pao out, particularly if Ashton's is maybe a little bit faster. Chien-Pao could potentially deal with the opposing Incineroar. Something like a Sacred Sword will be able to get that knockout. The only thing is there's no Terrestrialization this time on Ashton's side. It's been used on that Ogerpon, so no Terra Stella here today.
No, not today, not at least for this game, but we do have the switch out here. Incineroar, wanting to keep those Intimidate cycles going, is willing to give that Lando as a KO tribute in this case, as the Protect does come out from Amoonguss. Ice Spinner does try to target down at least on that slot, but if this is a Pollen Puff play here, this will be such a great advantage for Ashton, and we do get confirmation the Focus Sash is back, ladies and gents.
Absolutely love to see this on the Chien-Pao. You kind of think, the Sacred Sword must be tempting, but then the Amoonguss could easily go for that Spore into the Chien-Pao. So the Ice Spinner had to go into it in order to try and get it off the field before it had the potential to go for that Spore. Amoonguss being the perfect partner here for the Chien-Pao, enabling it now with some support of redirection as well. Although that's not going to affect the opposing Amoonguss, you can draw in the attacks of the Landorus, enabling the Chien-Pao to go for the Ice Spinner into the opposing Amoonguss, and they don't have to worry about it. It'll be gone. And even if you want to switch in the Incineroar, it doesn't have a lot of HP remaining, and Ice Spinner is still going to hurt.
It really will, as it's quite curious to see which Pokemon it is. It is indeed Incineroar getting that additional Intimidate going, but like you mentioned, Incineroar's already at such low HP right now. It just comes to depend on which focus there is going to be here. Ice Spinner does try to at least guarantee that, but Sludge Bomb, surely if there's a double up, will be enough to pick up the KO. Earth Power focuses on the Chien-Pao. Now does truly break that focus, Ash, bringing it down to that final 1 HP it has available. So Ashton really trying to take the further offensive and actually picks up the KO on the Landorus, so allows that Incin to stay on the field, which will subsequently mean Amoonguss over on Marco's side gets another regenerate ability proc, apologies, and will be back on the field maybe at a later time, but Urshifu's in though.
I think Urshifu's going to give the Amoonguss a little bit of a rest at this point, and I think a perfect timing too, because you have that choice scarf, you're able to try and deal with this Chi and Pao. Even if it wants to try and protect, Unseen Fist is just going to be able to steamroll right through it, and Ashton only has these 2 Pokemon remaining. Even if you want to go for the redirection, Chi and Pao isn't going to be able to deal with the Urshifu and the Incineroar and the Amoonguss in the back all at the same time. It only has single target type moves, particularly when you have the Incineroar going for the fake outs. And now Urshifu free to just go for that Surging Strikes, bop it away, and now it really is a 3v1. And Amoonguss has done many miraculous things in this set so far, but I don't think knocking out all 3 Pokemon is going to be one of them.
Yeah, it's very tough even for the little mushroom that can try, and it does usually on the time actually do a really good job about it. But yeah, at this point, you just don't have any offensive pressure that is quite useful to be able to pick up the necessary KOs you need. Nevertheless, in the mirror versus the other Amoonguss, but we do have Terrestrialization from Marco's side, just wanting to guarantee to speed the game up just a tiny bit.
Yes, but I do like this as well from the Urshifu, you know, giving it that extra little bit of oomph behind the damage, because you're going into an Amoonguss, it really doesn't mind taking those Surging Strikes, and so you just want to do every little bit you can to help, like you say, Costa, close out this game, because we're going to be seeing a Game 3.
Oh, it's just been so great so far. Like, the back and forths, you felt like, once again, Ashton, it just seemed like he was so commanding in that Game 1, and Marco was able to just grab that momentum, just shift it back as he does go ahead and pick up that KO, which does guarantee that Game 3 onto the Amoonguss.
You know, one thing in this game too that really stood out to me was actually that turn 1, where the Landorus just completely decimated the opposing Raging Bolt, put it in such a precarious position that we actually only saw it rejoin the field in order to take a fake out and get KO'd.
I needed a double take just to see if it had a Salt Vest or not, because I was like, wait, that was a bit too much damage, Lando. What are you doing there?
Well, that's the thing, you're almost thinking, is it Mold Breaker? No, wait, it doesn't get that ability. I mean, Sheer Force, again, it was just demonstrating what a Sheer Force it really is, if you know what I mean. You know, it's able to do that additional damage. It will stop the secondary effects coming into effect, but then if you stack it with the Life Orb, it's just such a force to be reckoned with. And that's why I do really like the way that Ashton is bringing that Chi and Pao and trying to play with it as safely as possible, going for that Pollen Puff, because he knows that the Chi and Pao is the secret to be able to get rid of that opposing Landorus.
Yeah, no, 100%. There it is once again. The Earth Power just dealing so much damage, leaving that Raging Bolt on 15 HP. But the Ivy Cudgel, really nice focus here. We do know, of course, there was a heightened critical hit ratio that could have come into play and guaranteed the KO, so that could have immediately changed up this affair, maybe even giving Ashton enough room to go and lock it out in Game 2, but it didn't come to be. That Intimidate cycle was so important.
Exactly, and these Ice Spinners just not finding their mark on the correct Pokemon thanks to the way Marco was able to play this. I love the way the Amoonguss did manage to get its little KO though. Always really great to be able to see it, you know, providing more than just a supportive role. But it really came down to the powerhouses here. Marco playing so incredibly well with that Landorus as well as the Urshifu, preserving it right to the very end where it can come in and just sweep through, clean up the end game nice and neatly.
And it's quite interesting because in Game 1 we saw Raging Bolt in the first 2 turns. It was still brought down to so little HP, even with a poison status, but it was a bit of the shuffling of the switches that Ashton was able to position himself in a quite nice spot where he can actually completely utilize Chi and Pao. And in this Game 2, it just felt like Marco found ways to really shut it down. With the Intimidate cycles, which is such a key player here, maybe it could be that Ashton could perhaps take into consideration the Urshifu Rapid Strike over on their side of the field, you know, try to get that rotation going. You need to try to find a way to break down that core of the Incineroar and that Amoonguss, which feels like is sponging up all of the offensive prowess that Ashton has in his arsenal.
And I think it leads into a good point about the lack of speed control that we're seeing from these trainers. Yes, you've got the Choice Scarf on Marco's Urshifu, but other than that, there isn't really a lot of different utility being used. As we jump into Game 3, are things going to be completely shaken up by our trainers? One thing's for certain, though, Ashton's not messing around. Both trainers have brought their Amoonguss on the field, no surprises there, but Chi and Pao versus Landorus, that is Chi and Pao's territory.
It really is, and already on the offensive, you know that Marco may feel forced to try to go for defensive plays here, whether that being a Protect and a cycling of the Intimidate, which can open the room for reads from Ashton's side. You know, allowing yourself to go for Sacred Sword in anticipation of an Incin switch in here, but you've got to be very cautious of the Amoonguss. It is sort of given free reign to be able to spore into that slot, unless Ashton does consider having the Oedipon in the back for free switches in order to be completely immune to those scores.
I mean, the Chi and Pao has its choice of Pokemon here, you can go for the Ice Spinner into either one of these for super effective damage, and even maybe try and follow up with a Sludge Bomb into the opposing Amoonguss to try and get the KO. The issue is you're not really going to be able to. The Citrus Berry is going to be able to give it that extra bit of longevity. The Ice Spinner instead, it does indeed go into the Amoonguss. As I said, not going to be enough to get a knockout. Is going to be able to activate the Berry, and now you're in this dangerous spot with your Chien-Pao where it could indeed take a Spore. It
could indeed. Now the question is the read there or is it not? The double up is into the Amoonguss. No spores coming out here, just a Sludge Bomb focus here. It's sort of very tumultuous, the fact that Marco needs to take into consideration all of Ashton's choices to be able to negate any spores focusing onto any of his slots.
It's a bit like the Amoonguss don't recognize there are other Pokemon on the field. They're just going for Sludge Bomb across.
They just see the other mushroom and they're like, wait.
Yeah, I will be the dominant mushroom here. You know, I'm going to be victorious. But Incineroar's also going to join the field here. The Intimidate's going to be able to pay off against the opposing Chien-Pao. You have the Fake Out potential now to break the opposing Focus Sash, as well as just apply a lot of pressure with those Flare Blitzes. We know that there's not a lot that either Pokemon can do to the Incineroar, particularly considering it is holding those safety goggles.
Oh, as we've got the Urshifu being able to switch in here, take that Ice Spinner quite nicely, but this opens up Ashton focusing down, doubling onto it, but no, actually, I take that completely back. Flare Blitz, more than enough to pick up the KO onto the Amoonguss, so all of a sudden, we've got one of Ashton's key players knocked out of this Game 3, but we got a new opponent, and it is Fluttermane.
Honestly, Marco has checked the Ashton Cox book out of the library and is reading him perfectly in this game. Fluttermane joining the field, though, is a very interesting adaptation. The issue is that is still a Choice Scarf Urshifu on the opposing side. It hasn't taken an Intimidate. It's going to be formidable with something like those Surging Strikes. There is no Amoonguss to redirect them. Chien-Pao and Fluttermane very exposed right now.
Yeah, they really are, but I feel like Ashton does, at least from his side, he has a bit of a shutdown lock play that he could go for. He could go for Sucker Punch in anticipation of Water Terrestrialization in combination with a Moonblast focus onto it, but that does sort of allow Incineroar to kind of do its own thing, and we know that Marco does still have a Amoonguss available, so Ashton really needs to be cautious on when to make a very aggressive play here, as Marco still does have defensive plays that he can try to utilize.
Exactly, particularly with the type coverage that you've got there with that Fire, Water, Grass core. It does give Marco a lot of flexibility. This is one way, though, to be able to swing the momentum into your favor. Ashton going all out with this Fluttermane, the Fairy Terra type, boosting it up. Going to be able to hit hard with something like a Moonblast here.
Oh, as the focus, actually, there's an Aqua Jet that comes out first, so wanting to at least guarantee perhaps a double up KO with a Flare Blitz. If the Incineroar does survive this turn before it moves, Moonblast will definitely dispatch of that Urshifu. But what does the Chien-Pao lock into? Does it lock into Sacred Sword? No, it goes for the Ice Spinner, maybe anticipation of an Amoonguss switch in here, which allows Incineroar room.
Exactly, you have to go for the coverage here, but it doesn't pay off. Chien-Pao actually gets out unscathed. Fluttermane was the target there, and I think that was wise from Marco, because the Fluttermane coming in, a final switch up here for Ashton, you know that he's going to be banking on it to get the knockouts, and yes, it did. But at the cost of that Terrestrialization, I almost don't know if it was needed to get the knockout. It's a little bit dicey for sure.
Yeah, it really is. I feel like it's, if you're Ashton, you're thinking the Water Terrestrialization may be a big focus to try to be able to be aware of. However, we know, of course, that the Sword of Ruin being in play does mean that the Flare Blitz was able to at least pick up that KO with the chip damage. But we've got a situation now that Ogerpon is on the field. It is next to a Chien-Pao, which is definitely what it wants to be doing, especially when it has access to Stomping Tantrum that it can directly threaten that Incineroar with. Ice Spinner, quad, super effective versus Landorus. It just depends on how Marco is going to try to adapt to that defensive play.
Exactly, and Incineroar really capitalizing off the effect that Chien-Pao brings to the field with that Sword of Ruin. So now I think Ashton switching things up, bringing that Ogerpon in, that is also a Pokemon that can capitalize on it being a physical attacker, will maybe give him a little bit more momentum. Landorus, I think, is the only one who didn't get the memo on how to attack here with Sword of Ruin in play. But Chien-Pao's Focus Sash also still intact, so Marco is going to have to double up into it in order to try and get the knockout, and Chien-Pao can easily get a KO apiece here. If it wants to go for the Ice Spinner, it can go into the Landorus or Sacred Sword into Incineroar. Which one is it going to go for?
And I think both trainers trainers are very aware of the protect potential from this Landorus, so there's a lot of further mind games and subset layers to take into consideration here. So Ashton, if he tries to get the correct play right now and ignore the Landorus, he could double focus into that slot for now, the Amoonguss, and pick up a KO as the Ice Spinner is the first step for this. Not enough to pick up the KO, but the question is, does Ogerpon focus?
Yes.
It does! And it picks up the KO and forces Marco down to his final 2 Pokemon.
You could see Ashton nodding as soon as that protect came through on the Landorus, and I wasn't sure if that was a good nod or a bad nod,
Yeah.
but definitely confirmed to be a fantastic play there by Ashton, doubling up, calling the protect correctly and getting the KO. Incineroar joins the field, is able to go for that Intimidate. We've seen it before, but this is the question now. Ashton has the defensive capabilities. You can go for a protect on your Chien-Pao. You can always go for the spiky shield on the Ogerpon. You don't have to worry about opposing Urshifu with Unseen Fist at this point.
Yep.
The issue is, can Landorus read into that and go for a substitute?
But it does also have the option of terrestrialization still. It can
True.
try to go for steal, so this adds another layer to mind games on, does Ashton try to focus down on a Sacred Sword with a Sacred Sword rather than an Ice Spinner, but naturally you're going to see the double protect play here, or the Spiky Shield, as you want to be able to play things up, but I feel like the subsequent turn right now, the one coming up, is going to be the main crucial one.
Yes, and you have to burn through this fake out as well. Both trainers are down to their last 2 remaining Pokemon, so there can be no switching off the board. Landorus was indeed going down into the Ogerpon. I believe the fake out was targeted there as well. So Ogerpon seeming to be the threat. You know, it's able to go for some big damage with something like the Ivy Cudgel, but Chien-Pao to me is definitely the one more in the driving seat. It's fast, it's got its Focus Sash. It can get knockouts here. It could be Ashton's game.
It definitely can be. I don't recall if we've seen whether the Ogerpon outspeeds the Landorus or not. There could be, once again, speed interactions here to take into consideration, but it's whether Marco wants to try to terrestrialize into Steel or not with this Landorus. Does it want to try to forego the Ice Spinner? Because Ice Spinner, surely at -2, it can still likely pick up the KO onto the Landorus if it does not opt to go for the Terra, as we actually just see a safe protect there. Both trainers feeling things out.
I like that, though. Marco does have to play carefully with this Landorus, and the double up was actually going into it. A fantastic protect by Marco, now enabling this Incineroar to go on the offensive, go for that Flare Blitz, go into the Chien-Pao, bring it right down to that Focus Sash.
Yeah, I mean, critical hit. The main point here, folks, is the fact that Chien-Pao, it's got one leg it can finally stand on. It needs to be very cautious on this next turn. This is the main deciding turn right now on who will be able to win this and go straight through with a 4-0 record.
Exactly. I mean, the Incineroar taking so much damage and recoil as well for its troubles. That was a lot of bulk on that Chien-Pao. And now it's in a vulnerable position where, unless it's an Ice Spinner going into it, almost anything from either of these Pokemon is going to get the knockout. The issue is the Landorus. We've seen how much damage it can do, particularly to that opposing Ogerpon. The Ice Spinner connects. That's a one-hit KO. It is gone.
Oh, critical hit. No terrestrialization option at all. The Lando is completely gone. You can see Marco is dismayed there with the amount of reads that had to be taken. Ivy Cudgel, sure, doesn't pick up the KO, but at this point, any attack from Ashton's will. So many critical hits, Lou. I'm losing my mind right now.
Honestly, just such epic action at UUIC. Of course, Incineroar will fall victim to its own recoil from the Flare Blitz. A valiant effort, but it wasn't to be. Ashton Cox, with 1 HP on the board, is able to take this set.
And in what fashion as well? You see Ashton in a bit of disbelief as well as us. I mean, I'm definitely in disbelief.